So welcome to the PatternFly demo. We have a number of items to share with you guys, both for design and development. And we will be kicking it off on the design side. Matt Carrano, do you want to share what you have for data list and data table? And before you get started, just to our presenters, if you guys do have links that we can add to the doc so that people can go out to, either check out that work or check out the GitHub issue to make comments, that would be great.
Okay.
All right, Matt, go ahead and get started.
Yep, share my screen up. There is a link to this document that I'm going to be sharing in the agenda. So, all right. So I've over the past 2 to 4 weeks, I've been looking at our story for lists and tables. I think as most of you know, if you're working with the current PatternFly, we have separate list and table views that largely do the same thing. They address the needs to display a large data set, which is a common requirement in many, if not just about all of our products. I started by trying to summarize some of our common requirements for really either lists or tables, because I think one of the issues that we've found over the past couple of years is a lot of times there's a lot of confusion and overlap in terms of applying lists and tables in our products, and what the difference is, and when we should be using lists and when we should be using tables. So I started out with more of an approach of looking at the common requirements. I'm not going to go through each of these here, but they are listed in terms of the things that we need to satisfy. But I do want to talk a little bit about an initial proposal here and what some of my conclusions were. So in looking at this, I concluded that we do still want to support something that's like a data list and separately a data table. That both of those things are useful and they serve different needs, that we should be using lists when we need a more flexible layout, and we don't necessarily need or want all the information to be arranged in a grid. That we may want to include things, more complex elements like charts within a to represent an object. And tables really are the right choice when users want to see data in a grid type of structure with column headers and all the types of things that go along with that. Both of these elements need to be responsive, and that both need to support sort of the common type of manipulation options, filter, sorting, bind operations, which largely aren't dealt with in this proposal, but will be a separate story. So let me see if I can zoom this up a little bit larger on the screen. Okay, so lists. So lists will be largely equivalent to the list view we have now, where each row of the list can take any supported layout to layout information within the container of a row. Lists do not have headers because lists do not have columns, they do not have headers. They will be responsive, so at mobile sizes, the content will wrap according to rules of whatever layout is being applied. Data tables give us a little bit more structure and start to introduce headers and a grid-like structure. But the main difference here is I think what we realized is a lot of products are applying list views because they like the readability of the list versus the standard dense grid-like data table that we have now. So, so while this is technically a table, it's applying more of a data list type styling to the table. And this is something that in next steps visual design will look at this in more detail. We can support expanded rows within the table. I explored various approaches to building responsive tables, and this seemed to be the best approach, where at mobile sizes, the columns will stack into a set of attribute and value pairs like so. There's a number of examples out there of table components that will work this way. And then finally, that we would also, because there are cases where we need and want a dense table, that we should have alternate styling for the table, so we can have a denser display, or in cases where that becomes more desirable and important. So I think I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions. Okay, if not, again, feel free to take a look at the document, shoot me any questions you may have offline, and next steps on this are going to be technical feasibility and getting into a visual design cycle. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Leslie.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. All right, we're going to move on to the visuals section, and so Michael is going to take us through forms. Both Michael Celedonia and is on our visual team, and Kyle Baker is our visual lead. So just they will be up next.
Thanks, Leslie. So, like Leslie said, looking at a redesign of our current forms, looking at both visuals and also kind of making some suggestions for some interaction design as well. So starting out with kind of what is the bread and butter of all forms, the input field. You can see we're going with just a pretty simple outline rectangle form, and starting there and then creating all of these variations. As you guys know, input fields have many states. So what does it look like with the active state when you're actually typing in the form itself? It goes to a 2-pixel border in our blue accent color. And then looking at disabled state, looking at what we have called syntax hints, where we've got kind of sort of caption text underneath, little hints, placeholder text. What does an error state look like? How do we call attention to that? And I'm looking at things like how do we denote a required field versus an optional field, and giving the option to do both, and the proper documentation around when you should use one or the other. Input fields with the clear icon, info tips, what does that look like? Exploring a few options there. Then also these manual value controls. These are kind of end states that we want to achieve. I think, and I'll hit on this a little bit later, but I think we're going to take an iterative approach with implementing these, where we start with browser defaults and work our way up to the kind of more final designs you see here. And that is exactly how we're approaching things like this dropdown. So you can see we've got this kind of end result of a dropdown for both a single select and a multi-select. But we're going to start off with the browser defaults and iteratively, step by step, kind of work our way towards this in a way that makes sense for the scope of our development process. So I started another thing with input fields that I wanted to introduce was this idea of having a system of different sizes. And I kind of started off creating that system with like numbers and math based on our, mainly based on our spacers system. But after showing this and talking to development about this, we decided, or they informed me that it would be a lot easier to do this with our layout system using our grid. And we can achieve this exact system and this exact effect with our grid. It'll just be a little bit more of a flexible and scalable solution for it. So currently in PatternFly 3, I think input fields are kind of generally full width in a lot of cases of whatever they're contained in. And it's a little bit outdated with current form design. Kind of the current iteration or evolution of a lot of forms these days has input fields that reflect the amount of content that's going to be placed in them. So for example, you might use a tiny input field for selecting a state. If you're selecting the state that you live in and it's just 2 initials, you obviously don't need a full width input field for that. So just introducing this system as well to kind of create a more cleaner and modern form design experience. And you can kind of see that here. And another thing we're talking about is alignment of the labels. Right now, we suggest using right-align labels. And I think we're going to go away from that in favor of top and left alignment, mainly because it's a lot cleaner to use top and left align approaches. It works a lot better with our layouts. And also, we think the benefits of right-align labels are outweighed by the benefits of these two. But with that being said, we still want to support right-align labels because we are going to be coexisting with PatternFly 3. So we're not dropping them completely. We're just going to kind of push users in this direction to go with top or left alignment based on whatever, based on their use case. And then thinking about other just classic form elements, so radio buttons and checkboxes. Same exact thing with these in terms of the iterative approach. We're going to kind of start with browser defaults and work our way towards these final visual solutions. And then I have this slide in here just to show that pretty much all the functionality that we currently have in forms, we still want to include with PatternFly 4. So I have got this drag and drop behavior just showing how currently the item you're dragging kind of tilts a little bit, and that kind of is how it shows that you're dragging it, but we're kind of updating that with our shadow system to show that it's above the list, and then you drop it in wherever the blue line is drawn. And then again, the expansion behavior, it's the exact same as it is now, just with updated visuals. And that's it. Thank you guys very much. I am happy to address any questions or concerns or take any feedback you guys have, so just let me know. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. All right, Kyle, next up with navigation.
All right. So as Leslie said, we're going to be talking about navigation. So as with any navigation, it's a navigation system that we're talking about. So currently, we have just a single option for users, and that was appropriate when there was only a few applications for us to support, and that's our vertical navigation. So vertical navigation is great when you have a application with a medium amount of content, right? It doesn't work it starts falling apart when you have only a little bit of content or a little bit of navigation or a lot. But we can want to come up with solutions that would cover all cases. And so I'm going to talk about those now. So we have the single horizontal level. So this is when you have a few top level items and you don't have a second level navigation. In that case, right now we'd have, by default, you would get a hamburger icon, which would open and close this menu, but you don't need any of that functionality. Also, we're utilizing this increased header space here. And then, of course, our branding system, which ensures we have enough contrast over our content. So we're utilizing, again, this space here when you have a single layer, single level with just a few items. And then, of course, we have an option with a context selector. This is just a little bit different than what you saw before and in a little bit different position, but that's just going to make the design a little bit more modular. So I also did some responsive states. So you can see, again, this is the option with the context selector at full width. As we start breaking it down, you can see the logo is no longer included. You're going to get the context selector, and then we're going to have this navigation bar here where you can scroll the items back and forth. And again, here's with the branding, the logo. So if you don't have a context selector, and then we don't actually need the hamburger icon, as I said, because there's no panel to open or close, because you're seeing the top level navigation by default. And then at the smallest size, very similar to what you just saw. And again, you can see how we could potentially have a scrolling interaction back and forth. And we could also have other functionality, which you're not going to see here, but we could potentially have where you start to scroll down and this navigation bar could get sticky at the top. But again, that's something we'll explore once we get to the implementation stage. So that's the single level. And then, so if you have many top level items, they're not going to fit across this area, especially when you start to shrink the screen down. So it makes sense to utilize the vertical navigation for that pattern. So right now you can click the hamburger item to open and close this panel if you have content or no content. So we simplified the functionality a lot from what we have now. And this is an option where you have only a couple top level items, but you can actually open them by default. So you're still working in the closest level to what your content is. So right now, one of the current complaints is if you have only 2 top level items, you click it's taking up all the space for just those 2 items. Then you must click them to get your the flyout open. Well, in this case, we just show all of it by default, and then it basically has pinning functionality, but without all of the complication that comes with it. So again, you still have the hamburger to open and close that. And then in this option, we have a lot of top level items, so it wouldn't make sense to expose it all at one time. So this has an accordion functionality where you can open and close them, each one. And I think anybody who's seen this has seen this before with some of the other mockups. And then one thing that's new is if you have 3 levels, so your top level, your second level, and then you could use this area and your third level, and it brings that third level as close to your workspace as possible. So you're going to see that right above what you're working in, and generally that's where you're going to move if you're in your space with this content. We have this area here with this white box, but we could expand it up or down, but it just basically lives in the content area, always at the top. And then I did you can see here a responsive state. So as you start, there's the full size, and you start to break it down, we're going to get this overflow action, or this overflow icon you're going to see here. So you can click this to get the rest of your items. So as the screen shrinks, it'll eventually switch to this style overflow where you can scroll it horizontally, which is best for touch, but doesn't work that great for the larger sizes with possibly a scroll. So that's why we're using this overflow icon. And then you can see, of course, the content expanding down into this white box. And then you're going to still have the hamburger where you can simply just open and close the box with that the hamburger, and you're going to get this panel. So it's going to show you the top level, and then once you're done, you hit the X to close it, and you're going to get that scroll, which is going to keep your navigation closest to your content. And one thing I wanted to mention also is that, again, trying to keep this functionality pretty simple. When you're in the desktop state, this panel will be open by default, and what will happen is once you start collapsing it down, the panel will become closed by default, but the functionality of the hamburger stays the same, or it's just open or close. So keeping that as simple as possible. Again, bringing it down to a smaller state, you're going to just get this panel open, and you could just simply close it. That is it. Does anybody have any questions about this? All right.
Thought for sure we would have some navigation questions. No, I think that this is really great. And one of the things I just wanted to point out was with PatternFly 3, we had established a number of navigation designs and then kind of incrementally had different variations. And so Kyle's done a really great job of looking at a lot of different examples and uses and trying to approach this holistically on how we can have a navigation system that solves all these different uses. Okay. All right, next we will move on to CSS. Our items in here include Matt Carleton and Andres, who are both our CSS developers on the PatternFly team. So Matt, you want to kick us off with your items?
I have mostly form stuff that I worked on. Is this big enough? Can you guys see this well enough?
Seeing
Hold on.
seeing the demo agenda as well as.
Yeah, let's try this. These monitors are ridiculous. Okay, so basically what I was working on was decoupling the form elements that we had in the form component. So we can use them throughout different components and not have to worry about style issues. So we can just inherit the styles that are applied to them. So that was kind of what I was working on. So you can see here for the form, there's a form control, which includes like textual stuff like input and the select, the text area. And then there's also check, which is radio and checkbox. So those two things can be used throughout with the styles that were already applied to them through the form component that we had. Another thing, actually, if you look in the form controls, you'll see we now have a different style for the login input specifically. So this is something that's kind of unique to login. So we wanted to have a modifier for that. These things are kind of in the works right now because, like Michael was explaining, we're trying to figure out where we rely on browser defaults for things like focus and different things like that. So these are kind of like in flux. Once we make those decisions, then they'll get applied here. And they may change, but for now, they're just going to be browser defaults. The other thing I'm working on, which actually I don't have a PR up for just because of some design stuff that we're still trying to resolve, but is the input group. So you can see here a couple different examples of the layout that we would get within the input group. So this will get a little bit more revision, and then I'll have a PR for it. So if you want to take a look at that, keep an eye out for that. And then the other thing was, just basically kind of revising the form component itself. So we're going to pull all of the stuff out of here that we don't need in here anymore because we have components for it. And then also just applying the styles that Michael comes up with for forms in general. So the form itself will specifically just focus on mostly layout, and it'll pull the styles for all the different elements from their unique components. That is it.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Matt. Andres?
Yeah. Hey, so among other things, the thing I wanted to show today is the advances within on theming. We changed all the blueprints and guidelines to follow what we do with themes now. I also fixed a little thing. Let me share here. So whenever we have a light element within a light space, and we want to keep it always light, even if you change the background to dark, then it stays light. So that's another thing we have in the code now.
All right. Anything else from you, Andres?
Not really, no.
Okay. So Doug and Dana have been working, they are JS developers and helping out with the React side of getting some PF4 components introduced along with some others. But the first step in that was enabling to have the support there for it. Doug is not able to join us, but Dana is going to.
So yeah, I'll show a few things on that. Let me show my screen. I won't take credit for Doug's work, but he did quite a bit here to get this ready. So we'll start by showing this is the PatternFly React demo space for all the PF4 components. You can see that, right, Leslie?
Yep, I see it.
All right. So essentially, the long term, this isn't. We don't want to have multiple. One of our goals with PF4 is to not have a dozen different sites where you go to get information on how to use PatternFly, but to really consolidate that experience. So this is a bit of a temporary solution, and eventually this will get wrapped back into a singular location for showing the PF React demos and all of the properties that would be applied to these, and some examples here. So you can see button and title went in, and this is now taking us to the next phase of our development within PatternFly React. And then just to show within PatternFly React, the way the code is laid out, I bring this over. You'll notice there's inside of packages here. Now we have multiple things happening within React. So there's the old PF3 section, and then we're starting to see a good breakdown for PF4. And as well as one other nice, so there's some nice enhancements added. Not only TypeScript definitions are available for consumers if they want to use that, but we also have the PF4 styles baked in. So it's a much cleaner unification between PF4 CSS and PF4 React, where if there's a class change, the reason I mentioned it, if something changes or class is removed or renamed in PF4, once that's pulled into the React site, it will actually break the build because they're tightly coupled now, instead of allowing things to break and then having the framework component repo not realize that in time. So we're getting a lot better integration. And then there's another PR up that I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to that's going to help with generating these. So this is on the PF React repo right now, and this generator should go in today. And that's going to help with creating these components quickly. And we want to extend this back to PF3 React components as well, so they can also follow the exact same syntax. So we really want to unify that experience and have all of this new investigation that's being done for PF4 benefit the community, because we expect the PF3 React components to last for a long time as well, just with a different look and feel of PF3. And then let's see, I think that covers PatternFly React. Oh, the other thing that we'll see in these that is these deploy previews. So we've been using Netlify, and we want to also continue to do that with our PatternFly React, the same as we're doing in the PatternFly Next repo. So basically have previews built in for all of our pull requests, so that they can more easily be looked at and reviewed. So there's I think it's turned off for right now. We have a little bug we're working through in the next day or two, but that's something that's part of our goals for that. So that's it for PF React updates.
Yeah, and then you're also next for the name change from box to card. And then I don't know if you can also review Adam's work that he did to convert the PF3 cards to PF4 cards.
Yeah, sure. So that's in a PR still, but let me go find that PR for it. You'll see this now we have card in here so that was a simple thing, but all of those were renamed. So that's the new component name as well. And then I don't know, I had mentioned there the workspace improvements to show handlebars. Is that later on? Oh, you know what? I typed it and I deleted it, but let me show it briefly. So then within the workspace, if you're curious and you're building for PatternFly, you'll see there's a new Handlebars tab. And this really shows how the handlebars, which is what we're using to build up the examples and these demos, was constructed. So if you are contributing to PatternFly, this is a nice addition, kind of a secondary view into how things are put together. And as part of that, it also shows what components are used to put things together. So that gets more important when you start to get down to the demos, the examples, and you'll see a lot of, just at a glance, okay, which components are being used to build up these examples and the demos that we have. And then along with, let's see, Adam has a PR. Let me show that briefly. We're going to be merging that. So starting to add upgrade examples here it comes here. So this one's only being held off because I renamed everything on Atom. So, and we're still looking for a permanent home for these examples, but you'll notice here that we show the PF3 syntax. So you can see it here in the old container bootstrap styles here and what it used to look like. And then along with that, you'll see in PF4 what the same component would look like along with the new class structure. So our hope is to provide these for the components that have a one-to-one mapping from PF3 to PF4, so that it's very clear what the new structure will be as people migrate. And then just to start to get a feel for what's going to look different. So this is the first example of that.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Any questions? Right. And I see Jenn joined just in time. Jenn has been leading our effort on accessibility. And so she has a couple of, an update on the accessibility guide as well as labels for icon buttons.
So the first item that I'll go over is just a really small update I made to the button examples. So if you see here, we have most of the buttons have labels, but then this last button here has an icon. And originally this example was included without any text alternative for what that icon means. So I just went through and included the ARIA label attribute on the button itself to include that text label for what that icon would mean, so that users who are using assistive technology like screen readers would get a label for that button. And mainly updating the button component here, and then also included that in the documentation here for the accessibility section. But then there were also a couple of instances where button icons were being used, and I went through and updated those as well. And then the other update I worked on during the sprint was a second revision to the accessibility guide. So the first version that I put in, the structure was a little weird, and I was struggling to figure out how to get new contents in that. So I worked with Stacy. She helped out a lot with helping me sort of refine the structure so that I can continue to add contents to it. So just kind of going through the main updates that I made were just kind of a statement of what our expected level of support is here, followed by checklist. So the checklist right now are primarily composed of the web content accessibility guidelines, and I referenced the numbers for those guidelines that are included here. Originally, I had these in just a bulleted form, and I thought those were really hard to really scan and process. So I broke them out instead into a table so that you can kind of scan the list, also find the links pretty easily. And then I also kind of broke them down in terms of mapping to area of responsibility. So if you're primarily a designer, then I wanted to make it easy for you to kind of scan this list and see what are the guidelines that are most important for you to pay attention to as you work on designs. And then this checklist section also takes these guidelines and breaks them down by what PatternFly should be addressing versus what products should be addressing, because PatternFly can't really address everything related to accessibility. So I have that initial differentiation here, but my primary focus will still be on fleshing out these and the rest of the guide until we get to the and just a later priority for getting back to the examples shown here. So this is just kind of a higher level overview of things that products should pay attention to. And then there are guidelines where there aren't really specific standards on what to follow, but where we might want to define specific standards in the context of PatternFly. So I have these sections here, PatternFly guidelines, followed by techniques. So any guidelines where we are kind of saying like you could do it this way or you could do it that way and it would be accessible, but in the context of PatternFly, we want to standardize on that. We would document those in this section. And then just like with the WCAG, for all of their guidelines, they provide techniques to help you with meeting that accessibility guideline. So any techniques that we want to standardize on as well would be documented in this section. And I did go through and just add an initial section here, labels and accessible names on how we can address this aspect in PatternFly. And that's pretty much it for the accessibility guide. Any comments or questions?
All right. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
Adam, who's not here today, also had an update for PatternFly 3 on fixing our labels that I wanted to share with you guys because the fix does require a bit of a manual update if you want to see the change in your application. So I think what they ended up doing, Matt Carleton, I think you could correct me if I'm wrong, is replacing the icon that was used here. Is that right, Matt?
Yes.
Yeah, yep. So we ended up changing the icon so that it looks like it's aligned with the text versus it's about 1 pixel off in the old. So this is not a breaking change, but it does mean that if you want to get this update for your you would see this in the toolbar filter. These are the tags, the filter tags that you would see. If you want this update, you would have to go in and I guess replace that icon. And then we also have, do we have either Amiee or Patrick to go over the PatternFly? Awesome. So Amiee will be covering the PatternFly React demo app.
Okay, let me share my screen.
And this is also for PatternFly 3.
Yes. So I just have a pretty quick update about the PatternFly React demo app that Patrick and I have been working on. There's also a link to the running demo in the README of the repo. So yeah, this is basically a starter demo template to get apps up and running using PatternFly React components. Before, when I demoed, we just had the vertical nav component, and now we've included a masthead and a list view, which Dave Taylor contributed. And we also included a table component with filter integration. So I just wanted to give a quick update on the progress that Patrick and I have made with this demo app. And like I said, there's also a link for those who want to check it out further. But that's it for me.
Great. Thank you, Amiee. Did I miss any other demo items that we need to share? Okay, so I just quickly wanted to go over, so you've seen a lot of the progress that we've made thus far. I did want to show you, I think it's been mentioned before, but we do have milestones identified within the PatternFly Next repo. We're currently in Alpha 3, so you can go in and check out all of the issues that are in progress. We have people assigned to it, to the ones that are in progress. So that is well underway. You can expect for this alpha release to be coming July, I think 13th. Yep, July 13th, so that you can see dates associated with all these milestones. So that's Alpha 3, and even if you go into Alpha 4, you can see we have visuals trying to get ahead of development. So we have a lot of that stuff in progress, some of which was demoed here, but you'll be able to see what's up and coming as well. Always feel free to take a look at the issues and comment if you have any comments. And one other thing that I did want to point out was that on our PatternFly repo, under the main page, there's a projects board. There's two different projects boards. One's for PatternFly 3 feature board, and one is for PatternFly 4 feature board. So these boards help to just show, you know, where the issues are in the process. We do use tags as well to try to identify this. But as Dana had demoed today, we do have this React development starting up and have a number of people, different people involved there trying to get our React components introduced as the CSS becomes available. So also just wanted to make you aware that that was on the horizon. Any last questions or comments? All right, well, that concludes our demo. So I will send out the recording. Definitely reach out to us with any questions or comments, and hope to see you next time. Bye.